Hey, hello, and how are you, everybody? Welcome back to Leading the Charge, the podcast. I'm Dom Tibbetts, a special guest joining us. I've only done this one other time. We call this the Behind the Enemy Line segment here on Leading the Charge, the podcast. Joining me all the way from Duval, Mia O'Brien of ESPN Radio, the Action Jack Sports Network, the O'Brien NFL Notebook, the 904 Club, founder of all that, a trait jack of all trades, I guess is how I would describe you, Mia. It's incredible to look at like your biography and be like, man, look at all the stuff, all the content that you are turning on a daily basis. But you've also been covering the Jaguars for a better part of 7-8 years now. So when it comes to reaching out to somebody to talk to about this team and what this matchup will look like Sunday, you're the first person I go to. And also because Roll Bombers, of course.
I was going to say, don't bury the lead here, Dom. The most important note on my resume is that I attended Ithaca College because that's what trumps everything. Roll Bombers, baby.
Hey, listen, when the Park School wants to start sending us some checks, just let us know. Talk to Jack Powers or Pete Johan.
Pete, we're begging you, Pete. Please send us some money. I would love for that. Yes, I'm free publicity for you because all I do is connect the Bombers. Continue, Dom.
Yeah, you got it. Well, so getting ready for this matchup, Mia, Sunday, 1 o'clock down in Jacksonville at Everbank Stadium. This is not the Jaguars team, and I think a lot of Bills fans know that from when they won 47-10 last year over the Jaguars in the regular season, week 3. Liam Cohen and James Gladstone have just come in, and it feels like they've got a culture change that is very similar to like what Bills fans, I think, saw when McDermott and Bean kind of took over in 2017 and 2018. And you're seeing that on the field. I mean, they've flipped around, won 13 games. I think they're one of only very few teams in the NFL, and you might correct me on the staff if I'm wrong, Mia, who have flipped from losing 13 games in a season to now winning 13 games in a season. Just from this season, what has been the biggest difference and why we're seeing this Jaguars team play like they were maybe a few years ago when they made that run to the AFC Championship with Blake Bortles?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that meeting a season ago because in more ways than one, that was a turning point for this franchise. Well, yes, Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke finished out the year. A lot of folks would tell you that the defeat on Monday Night Football in Buffalo, New York, or in Orchard Park, I should say, that was the beginning of the end. Some might tell you the week prior against the Cleveland Browns was too, but I digress. Point being, Liam Cohen said this morning, ironically enough, that they are not looking at that tape at all whatsoever. They will certainly acknowledge it, but this is a different team, despite many of the names on the back of the jersey being the same players that were on the field that night at Highmark Stadium. And that's what makes this whole thing insane. The Jaguars, yes, certainly turned over much of their roster. I believe it ended up being about a 48% number. But at the same time, it's still Trevor Lawrence. It's still Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, still Travis Etienne, largely outside of two positions. And even then, we'll get into it. The offensive line shuffle, largely the same offensive line that it was a season ago. And so what changed? And I would tell you this, and this is something that was said to me early on during this 2025 season. The Jaguars felt that they had a lot of thermometers in their locker room. They just needed to turn the temperature up and they needed to insert some thermostats into that locker room. Not that those temperatures did not have the ability to shoot all the way up past 100 degrees, and they certainly have this year. But the belief was we have to up the ante around them, create a sense of young, hungry, intrinsically motivated. They've been able to do that with the combination of Liam Cohen, James Gladstone, and of course bringing back their lone Pro Football Hall of Famer, Tony Baselli, as the executive vice president of football operations. And so it's been incredible to see. It feels different than the 2022 run where it felt like more of a magic carpet ride, where no one could believe that the Jaguars had turned around from 2-6 to rattle off 6 straight wins, make the postseason, combined with the Tennessee Titans collapse down the home stretch of the season. And then in 2017, because the Jaguars hadn't made the postseason in 10 years, it just felt like house money. And I wasn't even here for that, but that's really been echoed to me. That was kind of a, hey, we've got this really volatile defensive group that doesn't shut up, and we'll see how they fare against the likes of the Buffalo Bills, against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and ultimately the New England Patriots. And so it's different than the Jaguars' previous playoff experience over the last decade plus, and excited to see how it unfolds starting on Sunday.
And you go back, you look at just like the matchup. So the blowout win last year for the Bills was this weird like outlier. Because I go back to the season prior, they played in London, which is home field territory for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're a tough team to beat across the pond. The Bills lose that weird game 25-20. Bills fans will hate to go international ever because that was the game where Matt Milano got injured. So many other guys just piled up injuries and they played like a dumpster fire. And then 2021, I'll never forget. I was living in the state of Florida with you at this time. We're both working local TV. A buddy had dragged me over to Jacksonville to go watch them play the Bills in the Urban Meyer game, 9-6, one of the worst football games I've ever seen in my life. I still want a refund. I somehow am looking for that from Ticketmaster. Then 2018, you had a 24-21 win for the Bills. And then, you go back to 2018 was the last one I'll get to here where the Jaguars win 10-3. And that was, you talk about like, that volatile defense in that year for the Jaguars. Bills fans, I think, felt very much the same way. They were just happy the 17-year playoff drought was over.
Right.
Just happy to be there at this moment. But the one thing I go back to, whether it was that 22 team with this Jaguars, Mia, or the 2018, you've mentioned that defense. Buffalo's offense lives and dies by Josh Allen, of course, and the run game, which has been the NFL's best run game this entire league. James Cook just won the rushing title, first Bill to do that in years. Jacksonville's defense, though, I think it's 85.3 yards per game. So the top rushing defense against the top rushing offense. It makes for an intriguing matchup. But what has been just the difference of why that unit is playing such lights out football when it comes to the run defense?
Yeah, I think it stems from defensive coordinator Anthony Campanelli's biggest pillars when it comes to defensive philosophy. Number one is stopping the run through sure tackling, and number two is takeaways. And because the Jaguars have done both of those to a T, being the number one rushing defense for the first time in franchise history in the National Football League, coupled with leading the league with 22 interceptions, let alone takeaways, a number that is astounding considering the Jaguars had 9 total takeaways from a season ago. Again, largely the same roster, folks, which is what is insane to hear. But I just think it's that emphasis on constantly rallying to the football, playing through the whistle, ensuring that you wrap up tackle properly and basic fundamentals. And that's what's so cool about this young group. I mean, you go up and down the Jaguars defense, and there's still a lot of young players. People forget Trayvon Walker, the number 1 overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft. He's just 24, 25 years old. You go through their defensive secondary. Antonio Johnson's just 24 years old. Jarian Jones is 25 years old. Buster Brown is 26. Like, these guys are still young. And so that's where it's been really cool this season to see, because of the teaching. I won't even use the word coaching because Camp prides himself, Liam Cohen prides himself, that they are teachers first. You now see a group that maybe in a previous era, they were just told, here are the plays you're going to run. Now you see them where they are, as soon as they get into the locker room, they're still talking about like, oh, well, the reason I got beat on this wheel route was because of this. And in film study, we're going to have to go over this, and this. Like, these are the same 22-year-old, 23-year-old kids that, like, a year ago, I never would have guessed that you would have heard them talking about that in the post-game locker room. But they've understood the game at such a nuanced level thanks to this new coaching staff that now we just see them at a point where, because they're so honed in on those fundamentals, it ends up showing in the box score in terms of those total numbers and stopping the run and the takeaways.
You mentioned Trayvon Walker, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that we are getting a Josh Hines-Allen versus a Josh Allen matchup. Is there a certain person on that defense, Mia, that runs the motor? Is it Josh Hines-Allen? Is he the guy that kind of sparks everything? Or is it a combination of all 3 tiers of the defense that each have that 1 or 2 guy that spurts this? How does that all kind of the engine turn there?
Schematically, Trayvon Walker is the straw that stirs the drink, especially here in this last month in which Campanelli has been unafraid to move him inside and shade him over a guard, which is something that Jaguar fans have clamored for between Mike Caldwell, the defensive coordinator during his rookie campaign, and then 1 second, I'm good, I brought lunch. Want to know if I need Chick-fil-A. Wonderful place here at UNF.
And you denied it too, which is great, which means you did.
Listen,
staying firm.
I weighed in at 126 this morning. I was not very happy about that, Dom. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not Michael Jordan, but we got work to be done. I'm not trying to make it to my playing weight, but I want to get close to that. So Trayvon Walker, now that he is kicking inside, which is something that we knew because that's what he did at Georgia, that he could play. basically every position outside of a nose tackle up and down a line of scrimmage along the defensive front. But despite Mike Caldwell talking about it, despite Ryan Nielsen talking about matchups and the best possible matchups and identifying them and putting the player in the right position to succeed, and despite the fact that Trayvon Walker would line up inside in practice last year, we never actually saw it during a game. And if we did, it was like 9 snaps for the whole season, and that was it. Camp has been unafraid to identify that matchup and exploit it. And so because he is perhaps their best run stopper, and because he recorded and was the first Jaguar in 15 years to record back-to-back 10-plus sack seasons, and he's coming off of that. He's played through a wrist injury. He's played through a knee injury. If that guy gets healthy, yes, I will say that Trent Baalke may not have been wrong after all, Dom, because he has a skill set that very few players in the National Football League possess. And so in terms of stopping the run, therefore creating plays on the back, or creating opportunities, I should say, for defenders in the back end. That's where Trayvon Walker, for me, he's the most important cog in the machine. To your point of who is that emotional leader, who's the guy that the energy feeds off of, Foye Oluokun is perhaps the easiest answer to that, just because he's at the heart of the defense. He wears the green dot as the inside middle linebacker, back at the Mike position where he should be, which has allowed Devin Lloyd to thrive, now playing at the will position where we saw him each of his first 2 seasons with the Jaguars. And then I'd also throw Jarian Jones into the conversation, just because, not because he's a friend of the pod and friend of mine, but because he has this energy about him. And I did a one-on-one with him that's available on YouTube pretty readily. I did a one-on-one with him back in April, and he talked about it then. He is someone who grew up a Jags fan. MJD was his favorite player. He played at Florida State. He truly believes that he is the straight edge, somewhat, version of Jalen Ramsey. He's not going to mouth off to you, but that sort of energy and that edge that Liam Cohen and Anthony Campanelli have tried to convey throughout this roster up and down, he is that guy that the Jaguars feed off of his energy. Pete Prisco said it on the Jaguars happy hour on Monday. He said it on CBS this week too, and it's so true. Like, when you're close to this program, he's the one who's got the juice. And Foye is the one who's going to break down the huddle, and he's the one who's going to be instructing players where to go both on field and off field. But yeah, if you're looking for the juice guy, like, no one's been better than Jarian, especially since he has reassumed a starting spot in the lineup with Jordan Lewis done for the year with a foot injury. But even prior to that, they knew they had to get him back on the field in nickel and dime looks, whether they had those 2 corners inside or if they played him outside and rotated him with Greg Newsome. And so, yeah, I know that's a long-winded answer to give you 3 names, but I think schematically, Trayvon Walker is, if you're doing a scouting report, he's your game wrecker. If you're the Bills, like, that's who you're most concerned about. But in terms of who is the heartbeat of that defense, and nothing against Josh, by the way, also friend of the pod, also a fellow New Jersey son, whose relatives are natives of Ithaca, New York. So he loves to note that. He loves for me to note that whenever I can. So shout out to Josh's family up in Ithaca. But yeah, like, it's Foye is their vocal leader, and then Jarian is the juice right now that they're just feeding off of.
Yeah, and like, this team, they're, you know.
Oh, I should have noted too, Dom. Jarian was the one who gifted Trevor the grill, for context here.
I'm happy about, because I'm gonna get to that when we flip to the offense, because I will say I did have a very good hearty laugh watching Trevor Lawrence throw a grill into his mouth. I think Barstool posted that, like, Trevor Lawrence is now a true Floridian, and it couldn't have been more true. It was a little nice comical moment as I'm working in the media room after the Bills beat the Jets yesterday. But I like the long-winded answer because there's a lot of things to get to, and a lot of Bills fans here haven't seen this. You know, you don't see the Jaguars every so often the way you do some of these other teams that aren't in your division, like the Chiefs and the Ravens, where it just feels like the Bills are getting these instant classic matchups anytime you play. The one thing defensively, you're talking about guys in the secondary, you go look at just, I'm basing this pure off of like the ESPN rankings of like yards per game allowed. Passing wise, Jaguars defense is kind of in the middle there too. But everybody in Buffalo knows, and around the NFL knows, the passing offense has been really inconsistent. When James Cook has been stopped, and I go back to the Texans game in Houston, that was really the kind of eye-opening thing of like, man, if Josh Allen gets any sort of pressure on him, and he had sacked 8 times there, right? If Josh Allen can't get it done with his legs, James Cook can't get it done in the run game, and you put pressure on Josh Allen, you've got to lean on your receivers in this passing game to make something happen. And it's just been too inconsistent at times. So this is more of just a temperature gauge, Mia, and it's so early in the week. But where do you feel like this Jaguar secondary stacks up against this Bills offense in the passing game more specifically that just hasn't been there? Are there similar teams that you've seen them stack up against where they've matched up well, or is this a weakness where you feel like, hey, if the Bills really did have a shot of trying to play that complementary football, they're going to need to get the passing game going?
Yeah, the biggest comp I could probably give you, just based off of if you can comp Josh Allen to anyone, certainly Patrick Mahomes. We'll talk about that one in a second. But the first game that came to mind was the Los Angeles Chargers, where the Jaguars took the run away. They forced Herbert to make plays. And while Lad McConkey and Oronde Gadsden perhaps are a little bit more of household names comparatively to some of the folks that Josh Allen is throwing to up in Orchard Park, I do think that that's perhaps the best comp, where the Jaguars corners were just better than the Chargers wide receivers that day. And again, I think that you could make the argument that that Chargers wide receiving core, if only based off name recognition, that they are better than the Bills wide receiver core.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were able to stack up against them mano-a-mano is huge. But the biggest asterisk for me, the biggest prove it point for the Jaguars is the sack department in terms of actual pass rush, because they can pressure a quarterback. They can get a quarterback out on the move. There's no question about that. But actually bringing that quarterback down, that has been an age-old debate here in Duval for the last 3+ years. And that's why it's so often tied to Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. This idea of, oh, it's great that, they can get all these pressures and they can lead the league in pressures. But what are they doing for me when it comes to sacks? I just pulled it up just so that we have it out there in the open. The Jaguars are bottom 6 in the National Football League in sacks with 32 on the season. The Niners are league worst at 20, and they're also in the postseason field. So just file that one away. So I do think that for the Jaguars, it's not going to be a similar defensive front to what you saw Houston deploy against the Bills, where, let's be real. Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson are probably the best duo doing it right now. Right. And so but their back end and their secondary is also very good in Houston. But at the same time, like, those guys, they get the benefit of when those monsters up front are forcing the quarterback to throw the ball out in 2-point-some-odd seconds and make a ill-timed throw because they're pressured. That allows for them to make plays. That's what's impressive with the Jaguars, is they are much more content to basically make the quarterback sit back there and flux and just say, I don't know what to do with the football. And then they run him out of bounds, as opposed to taking him to the ground like Will Anderson or Danielle Hunter might. So that's where I do think, like, that if Josh Allen can escape contain, that's where, to bring it to the Chiefs' point, that was something Patrick Mahomes was able to capitalize on against the Jaguars. He was their leading rusher in that Monday Night Football game, week 5. And so I think that that's an opportunity if you're Buffalo. But the secondary mano-a-mano, they stack up better right now. And it's crazy because as I'm, lamenting about the lack of household names for the Bills wide receiving core, you could make that same argument for the Jaguars defensive backs. I mean, they don't have Derek Stingley. They don't have Jalen Petrie. Some of these guys like Houston does, where them and they're household commodities. But at the same time, they may be at some point down the line.
Without watching a lot of Jaguars defense, admittedly, this season, because I've been up here in Buffalo, the thing with Josh Allen is when he gets out of the pocket and uses his feet, as we've seen him do, when he gets out and runs, creates offenses, the second a team starts showing man-to-man and they flip their backs to him, right? Like if you're not taking a linebacker to play spy on him, which sometimes teams we have seen, like the Texans were kind of one of those teams where they basically were like, hey, we're just going to man up you in 3rd and 20 because we just have no respect for any of your receivers, and we'll just trust that our defensive line can get pressure to you. I know it's different the way you were talking about it with Jacksonville, but I feel like that is where, if the Bills are going to have any sort of luck in generating offense and getting that passing game going, to your point, it's, can Josh Allen take advantage of some man-to-man? What is, I guess, the general, a majority scheme of how
zone? They're pretty much, they're zone. They're a zone-based scheme.
Yeah.
So but they're going to run zone, but at the same time, so there are soft spots that can be exploited, yes, but they play it so well and they're so disciplined in running their zone that it almost feels like man. And they'll, pop off a quarters coverage where half the field is in man and half the field is in zone. But it's nothing like, the Texans to that point. At the same time, though, I do think, again, I go back to one-on-one matchups, the only one that the Jaguars truly struggled and their outside corners really struggled was against the Bengals, which I think anyone would struggle, kind of like anyone would struggle against Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. That's a tough cover for anybody one-on-one. And the Rams game, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba. Those were the 3, okay, we tried to go man one-on-one and it didn't work. The good news, if you're a Jaguars fan listening to this, is you're not going against JSN and you're not going against Puka Nacua on Sunday, or unless they're traded to the Bills at some point here this week. And so while I
Wouldn't
do
count on
think
that
that,
one.
yeah, while I do think there's opportunities to identify soft spots in the zones outside of the tight ends in Buffalo, you tell me. Like, I don't know who's exploiting that.
Yeah, it's been inconsistent. Khalil Shakir underneath has been this guy who gets a bulk of his share in the yards after catch. He's one of the best in the NFL at it, but we just haven't seen him produce in the way he has last year. A lot of that's because he's catching these orbit motion screen passes that are just not above the line of scrimmage. Joshua Palmer is supposed to be coming in and be this deep threat, and you just haven't really seen much from him. Obviously, the Keon stuff has been pretty chronicled. You've got a little bit of a deep threat you saw against Philadelphia. I did like to see them work Brandon Cooks into there a little bit, and the way they're utilizing him, in the deep passing game. You talk about a revenge factor here too. Maybe Gabe Davis, right? Like, does Gabe Davis get activated? And then what does Gabe Davis look like coming off his injury against his old team, right? So who knows how that all shakes out here. I guess probably it's a good time, since we're talking about offense, Mia, we'll switch into that part of it too. The Jaguars offense, I mean, they're just putting up numbers. And I think you would have thought Trevor Lawrence had a grill weeks ago with the way he's playing. A little bit of confidence, a little bit of swagger. I said it yesterday to somebody too. I was like, God forbid a white boy get a little motion down in Duval and they're just going to create a little bit of offense. But no, I think that's the other thing too, is like, this defense is good. But I also think that Bills fans probably should not underestimate the Jaguars offense, because up until about 3 weeks ago, I thought Trevor Lawrence was going to be a phony, was probably going to blow it at some point, have a collapse in the season, gets in the playoffs. It won't happen for him. I hand up, I was wrong. I 180'd it. The Jaguars and the Texans were like my two lead, and the Ravens. So like those three teams were like my least favorite matchups in terms of what the Bills can do. So long-winded explanation to get to the question, Mia, what is spurred in this offense?
Yeah, and it's wild, Dom, because the Jaguars went into this season saying Trevor Lawrence is learning his fourth offense in the last 5 years, and it's going to click at some point. But given the nuanced nature of the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Liam Cohen, Kevin O'Connell offensive structure, this is more intricate than anything he's ever run. And that is where I always say, and not just because I'm coming at you live from a university campus, but Trevor Lawrence, for better or worse, was basically passed along to intermediate 201 between his time at Clemson, the ill-fated first season in the NFL with Urban Meyer, and then, of course, the time with Doug Peterson. And that's not to say that Doug Peterson didn't teach Trevor. I think he had an incredible influence on Trevor in terms of teaching him how to study, how to watch film, because Urban Meyer didn't do that, and the Mickey Mouse offense at Clemson certainly did not either. And so I just think that, and I always quote our friend Mike Silver, because his book, which you can, of course, can purchase right now on Amazon, The Why is Everything, which is all about the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree and the rise of the influence of that tree and that scheme. So much of it is based on the idea of, number one, teaching, and number two, explaining players the why. We live in the Reddit, Wikipedia, go down a rabbit hole generation. You, me, the Gen Zers, we're all in the same boat.
Sure.
We love to know, well, I don't understand why this, and this match together. And we have the internet at our disposal, and so we can go down said rabbit holes. This is not a generation like many moons ago where you would simply hand them a playbook and say, go run this. And when you ask why, the answer is because I said so. That doesn't fly in 2025. And that's not to say Doug Peterson was doing that necessarily specifically. But the point is understanding, hey, this play comes before this play in the call sheet because it sets up this. And the reason in our opening scripts we're running this, and this is because they like to do this, and this, which sets up this, and that. Like that sort of intermediate level to 404 level type of thinking, that was not going on in Jacksonville throughout the last 5 years. And I certainly, with all due respect to Dabo Sweeney, don't think that Trevor Lawrence was getting that sort of education on the football field at Clemson either. And that's not a knock on Dabo. That's just the nature of college football. When you're a team like they had in 2018, they have the superior athletes, they win. It's just what it is. You play Charleston Southern the first 3 weeks of the year, and that helps too. So because of all of that, the reason it took Trevor until midseason for things to click was because of the intricate nature of this offense. Now, because of all of that, And because there were still questions coming into the year of, all right, what is Trevor? Is he a top 5 guy or is he a top 20 guy? Because of that, the Jaguars built this offense to be a run-first offense. And throughout the first 6-7 weeks of the season, they ran the crap out of the ball. They were a top 5 rushing outfit through the first 7 weeks of the season. And what you have seen since then is that teams have in turn crowded the box, coinciding with the emergence of Trevor Lawrence as a sophisticated passer of the football. And so now, because they're all coming at the Jaguars in, this is from like weeks 10 through 15, let's say, every team was rolling into Duval and they're playing single high safety looks. And so Trevor took advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And now you've reached a point where they've gone back to cover 2. And he's still taking advantage of it because now he has such a grasp of the playbook and the sport of football that now the Jaguars' short passing game can be an extension of a run game that averaged just 2.6 yards per carry yesterday against the lowly Tennessee Titans, who do have a top 10 run defense. Shout out to Jeffrey Simmons. And so that's another example of the Jaguars saying, you know what? We know we can't run on the Titans just because Jeffrey Simmons exists. But we have to keep them honest. And so Liam Cohen, while they ran 19 passing plays to 6 run plays in the first half, did not give up on the run. They did run the ball in the second half, not to tons of success, but at the same time, enough success that they kept the Titans honest. And I know it's the Titans, but you saw the same thing in Denver. The Jaguars were averaging, I believe, 3.5 yards per carry against the Broncos at Mile High. And it wasn't that same team that ran for 195 yards against the Los Angeles Chargers, but because they now have this added presence of Trevor Lawrence and this passing attack, receivers that are actually in the right position for their skill sets, which I'm sure is a whole nother can of worms we could dive into with the Brian Thomas Jr. of it all, the acquisition of Jacoby Myers at the trade deadline, allowing players to be in the right spot for them to succeed. And now the offense can work in perfect harmony. But it's insane to think that this was a team that when they started the year, they said, we got to be a run-first team because we're still waiting for Trevor to come along. And they knew. And Jeff Howe from The Athletic joined me on the Club 904 podcast earlier this year. And he and Liam went to college together. They're good buddies. He's done a lot of legwork himself on the McVay tree. And his guess was it would take about a year for Trevor to truly grasp this offense. So he's ahead of schedule. And he told me that back, by the way, week 10. Like Jeff told me week 10 after the bye. He's like, I think he's ahead of schedule. Like, I think you're going to start seeing it because you've seen glimpses. And Liam believes he's seen glimpses. And that's come to fruition. But it is hilarious that Doug Peterson and Press Taylor wanted to run this West Coast short passing attack that's an extension of the run game. And now, while it's not the same bubble screen game that Press was calling last year, it's still an aerial attack that you're seeing. His average yards per completion yesterday was 10.8 yards. And that's what it is. I mean, they identify soft spots in the zone, or if it's, if you're going to run man against them, they'll do that too. They'll identify matchups they like. And it's just 10-yard pass, 10-yard pass, 10-yard pass, run, 10-yard pass. Oh, we made it down the field. It's impressive to watch what they've been able to put together, coupling those two different identities into one throughout the course of 18 weeks.
Well, and I think if you're a fantasy football owner, Brian Thomas Jr., a little bit of a disappointment, as I'm sure it was for Jags fans out there, coming off of the first season he had there. Such a nice, strong rookie campaign. But one thing that, I was talking with last night in our post-game recap as we were talking about this upcoming matchup with the Jags was it feels like the Jacoby Myers trade was such a breath of fresh air and something that was, one of the better, trade deadline moves that we've seen, not just this season, but really in terms of like now getting to evaluate what his value was to the Jaguars. So just going to, when it comes to Jacoby Myers, Mia, just first your thoughts and then just the collective feeling now inside that locker room and that front office about what he brings to this offense, because I'm sure, as you mentioned, with Trevor being able to kind of move along in this offense at a faster rate and fighting that passing confidence that he has, a lot of it has to do is because he has to trust his receivers. And it feels like right off the rip, him and Jacoby Myers are kind of in sync.
Jacoby Myers is a former college quarterback at NC State, and he always credits that as to why he's such a crisp route runner, why he runs such quarterback-friendly routes, because he knows what it feels like to play that position and what is going to make life easiest for his signal caller. Make no mistake about it, while Jacoby Myers never played for Sean McVay, he might as well have been a Ram at some point in a past life, because he is exactly what those Los Angeles Rams wide receivers from Puka Nacua in the current age, back to 2018 to 2020 when Liam Cohen was the assistant wide receivers coach. He is exactly in that same mold of can play all three positions inside and out. He does the dirty work underneath, has no issue going across the middle of the field and enduring contact. He has a willing blocker. He checks every box. And this offense needed that player. They were prepared to, and they were, you could see it against Los Angeles Rams, to segue Travis Hunter more into that role. And it's hilarious that we're 29 minutes into this, and now we are just bringing up the number 2 overall pick in this past April's NFL draft. People forget he's even still on the roster despite being on the reserve injured list.
Right.
They were prepared to move him more into that role because day one, Liam Cohen stood at the podium in his introductory presser and said this offense will run through Brian Thomas Jr. And I don't want to say that it was an over-evaluation by Cohen, Gladstone, and Baselli, but the thought was you guys probably did too. Like, he's the next Justin Jefferson. He's the next Jamar Chase. And those guys play all 3 positions. They go inside and outside. And Brian's only 23 years old. He still could be that player.
Sure.
But at this current point in his career, and he had injuries this year too, he is as good of a vertical field stretcher as you could ask for. And that creates opportunities for Jacoby Myers, for Parker Washington, who, shout out to Parker, because the former 6th-round pick out of Penn State last year had to beg former wide receivers coach, friend of the Buffalo Bills, Chad Hall. Like, he had to beg Chad, hey, let me learn the outside wide receiver spots too. I don't want to just be a slot. And in Liam Cohen's offense, the Jacoby Myers and Parker Washingtons of the world are not just slot wide receivers. They are the backbone of this offensive structure. And you've seen that over the last 5-6 weeks of the season really come to fruition.
When it comes to this offense, Mia, because I have to give Bills fans some sort of like reconcile hope that, like, okay, this defense that has started to turn around a little bit, that is getting a little bit better in the run game. You don't necessarily have that big, massive running back one threat like a Derrick Henry would present. So I think fans are probably, and this might, be a little bit too far ahead, but they're, maybe not as nervous about as Travis Etienne in this run game as they would be if this other different premier back was in this matchup. But what is an area of this offense, and I know it's probably hard to find in the last couple of weeks here, where you still feel like there's some inconsistencies that might be the Achilles heel for this Bills defense to exploit?
Yeah, the Jaguars are still top 5 in the league in drops. So obviously, if you're a defensive back, if you can create havoc across the middle of the field and you can make contested catches even more contested for the Jaguars, yeah, like that's an easy one to point to, statistically speaking, and to quantify. I do think, and again, I've heard this from lots of former players, that we need to stop harping on the Jaguars' run game, but their offensive line has certainly been battered and bruised. Whose hasn't at this point of the season? So you also really can't just put it on them. But the Jaguars have had multiple offensive linemen in and out of the lineup. And so if you're looking for a matchup, I'm sure, not to put it on him, but like, i.e., if you want to take Greg Rousseau, and I don't know if he'd ever line up inside, but like if you wanted to take him and say he's going to go line up on Walker Little, who was the Jaguars' starting left tackle before he suffered a concussion that kept him out 2 weeks. Now they've moved him to right guard because Cole Van Lannon played so well at left tackle. Like, if you want to identify that and say, okay, well, he's making his 3rd career start at right guard, like, we're going to go after him. Like, that's probably your best answer in terms of finding that mismatch that you can take advantage of. But Travis Etienne had 3 receiving touchdowns against the New York Jets in a game in which the Jaguars, much like against the Titans, struggled to run the ball because the Jets do, despite picking number 2 overall in the upcoming draft, they do have a pretty good run defense. And so that's where I think Travis Etienne's ability to be a threat out of the backfield, as much as he's a threat in between the tackles this year comparatively to the last 2 years, that is something that so many thought that the Jaguars drafting Bashal Tutin in the 4th round out of Virginia Tech, they said, oh, that's the Bucky Irving. That is going to be Liam's toy. And Bashal Tutin does give the Jaguars a different look. I mean, he bursts out of a freaking cannon when you hand him the football, to be clear. But he is not the Bucky Irving. Travis Etienne was the Bucky Irving all along. And that's where maybe he doesn't hurt you as much on the ground if you're going to commit to defending the run at all costs. But he can certainly scoot outside in the flat and do some damage in the receiving game too.
ESPN Radio's Mia O'Brien joining me here. You can find all her work, and I'll let her plug this in a second here, but also the O'Brien NFL Notebook, the 904 Club, Action Jack Sports Network. If you are down in the fine state of Florida, the Sunshine State, Duval County, getting ready for the Bills-Jaguars matchup coming up Sunday at 1 o'clock in Jacksonville. Mia, we've talked about defense. We talked about the offense. We've gone about 35 minutes now, which has been great. This is fun conversation, easy to do when 2 friends get together and just talk a little football. Is there anything else that we haven't brought up about, whether it's just something that you really have liked to see from this Jacksonville team that you think could be an X factor that comes into Sunday's matchup against Josh Allen, this Bills offense, against this Bills defense that's still starting to kind of figure it out a little bit there too? Is there anything that we haven't touched on?
No, I think just the 1-0 mentality of, this feels as workmanlike an approach as I've seen in my 7+ years covering the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, not that they didn't celebrate yesterday when they won the AFC South, but I mean, as soon as we got into the locker room, it was okay. Now we play at one, once, especially once they found out that it was another 1 o'clock on Sunday game, they were like, okay, routine stays the same. Everything we're going to do stays the same. It's just the next game. No big deal, no pressure. And again, when I covered that playoff team in 2022, it was this idea, this magic of, oh my goodness, we made the postseason. This is so cool. And that doesn't exist anymore. Like, that's why when you hear that these are not the same Jacksonville Jaguars, like, they're not. Like, it's impressive to watch. And look, like, at some point in time, whether it's this postseason or next year, they are going to get beat at some point in time, because as so many have said, this is probably the least talented roster. If James Gladstone has any say, this is probably the least talented roster that Liam Cohen's ever going to be given. And look what he has gotten out of them. And so that's where I think for this Jaguars team, the fact that they are so bought in to the daily disciplines, their daily routine, putting one foot in front of the other, being where their feet are, like, it's, as someone who also teaches leadership at the University of North Florida, Dom, I can tell you this, like, it is inspiring to watch.
And also just, it feels to me, because I'm looking at the playoff bracket right now, and I was talking about this with some colleagues yesterday, whether it's the Jaguars, the Pats, the Chargers, the Steelers, like the AFC, any one of those teams, like it really feels like there's a moment where I could like make an argument about the Steelers and the Chargers being a little bit too out of their league at some points, but it's just, you just don't know. Like, look at how the Steelers won their game last night. Like, look how nobody gave them a chance to go beat the Baltimore Ravens in a win and in game. I certainly didn't, right? The Texans have this dominant defense, but sometimes CJ Stroud and this offense struggles. The Broncos, their defense is great, but how far can Bo Nix get them, right? I think I would have that same argument without knowing the Jaguars 3 weeks ago, when I used to think that they weren't as good as they are too. So it feels like the AFC is such a crapshoot in terms of just who could be sitting there in Santa Clara in a few weeks from now, because there's just so much, I would say, disparity between these teams. Right. And there's not that clear cut winner of like, this is the breadwinner. There's no Kansas City here. There's no Lamar Jackson trying to make a run. Like, Joe Burrow and that Bengals offense is in here too. So, hey, if lightning strikes, may it be the Jaguars or the Bills, and one of us gets to talk about being in Santa Clara. Before I let you go, Mia, can you plug where people can find your work, read it, watch it? Because like I said in the intro, I fumbled it a little bit because I had some notes and I'm just running all over the place. It's a literal LinkedIn resume of stuff.
Well, also, it's the first Monday of January, so everybody is in circle back mode. So everyone's head is all over the place. You're not alone in that regards, Dom. So hopefully we gave the people a little bit more of a strategic breakaway and also focused look into this matchup, but also a distraction from everyone emailing you that you spoke to in December and haven't spoken to in 3 weeks since. Yes, you could catch me on ESPN Radio, a variety of different programs there. I'm in my first year, and so I've kind of been across the network. So just follow me at Mia O'Brien TV. I usually post when I'm going to be on shows over there. You can subscribe to the O'Brien NFL Notebook. That's my private website over on the Patreon account. So make sure you sign up. Free 7-day trial for you Buffalo Bills fans who may want some intel on the Jags. Monthly memberships start at $5 per month. I do host Club 904, which is the 3 days a week Jaguar specific podcast on the Action Sports Jags 24/7 network, the official television home of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and of course, building the largest sports ecosystem on the internet in Duval as well. And that's where I oversee with them all the podcasts and videos and all that good stuff. And then I also am on the Locked On Jaguar Squad Show. So you can catch that 2 days a week, Sunday post game, as well as typically on Wednesdays. We do a midweek show with former Jaguar and Bill Marcus Ogden, the brother of Jonathan Ogden, which that's going to be a fun episode this Wednesday. I know he's itching to break down this one. And I'm trying to think what else. ESPN Plus, play-by-play for hire. Call me whenever you need. And then I also teach leadership at the University of North Florida, and I oversee all of our co-curricular programming and community service for the athletic department. So that's where I'm coming at you from now. Apologies, it's not the home studio, but it's become my home away from home when it comes to podcasting, besides the Action Sports Jacks television station.
No, totally get it. But one more question for you, Mia. Do you have days off? Do you know what an off day is?
Yeah, actually I did on Saturday. It was wacky because we didn't know when the Jags were going to play when I made my basketball play-by-play schedule and sideline schedule. And so I like intentionally didn't sign up and I let a younger broadcaster take those games on Saturday. And then the Jaguars played Sunday. So I was like, well, all right, I guess I'm going to like put the Christmas decorations away like and sit outside. Like, okay, cool. 70 degrees. It's not too bad.
And you're giving opportunities to the younger generations like
Yeah.
you and I were just so many short years ago, it feels like. So coming right out of Ithaca College. That's ESPN Radio's Mia O'Brien. I'm Dom Tibbetts. This has been Behind Enemy Lines on Leading the Charge, the podcast. Bills Jaguars Sunday, 1 o'clock in Jacksonville. Talk to you guys later.